straw. Well, technically, you're growing your plants in composting straw. So if you just stuck them into a straw bale without doing anything, they would not do very well. There's not much for them to survive in there unless you provided it constantly.
We've provided that factual
that's one of the
support.
tests of
That's
doing
right.
it, yes.
Doing it wrong.
So what you're doing is trying to accelerate the composting of the straw primarily with nitrogen and water to where the straw starts breaking down and it provides the nutrients to the crop.
All righty. So one would say, I'm intrigued. How do you go about setting this up?
Okay. You need to be able to garden. There's some of the same things you need with any kind of garden, depending on the crop. And I can take tomatoes is something we grow all the time in it, and it works very well. But tomatoes need the right amount of water, the right amount of sun, and warm temperatures. That doesn't change just because you're growing it in straw. So some of the advantages to using a straw bale is, one, as long as you're getting adequate sun and you have access to water, you can put the bale anywhere you want. It becomes the media. It is not dependent on having good soil, and that's one of the benefits. If you're in a brand new house on bad construction soil, you can you're growing it in the straw bale, so it doesn't matter what soil it's on. The bale can be placed on asphalt or concrete and work. In the city, you could put it up on the roof as long as you.
I'm so intrigued by this.
As long as you could access water and the drainage didn't cause a problem. So it's one of the real nice advantages to it. We did gardening for many years in our backyard and a smaller vegetable garden. And one of the things we ran into over time with a small garden is disease and insects start building. And it's hard to do good rotation in a small area. If you had a big area for a garden and good soil, this isn't as much benefit to you. But for us, it was becoming a problem. The nice thing with a straw bale is you're using a new bale every year, so you eliminate the rotation issue. In essence, you're starting from scratch. You're not bringing in the same insects or diseases that you would by growing in the same soil every year.
So big plus, no nematodes.
That would be a huge plus to it.
Yeah.
You can eliminate some issues that might exist in your soil.
And bunny rabbits can't reach it.
It's, the raised, like other raised bed gardenings, that is one of the advantages, is it gives you some additional protection from animals. You get more air movement around in them. I really like, at my age, working with plants that are 18 inches off the ground. My back appreciates that much
Stays
more.
those joints.
Absolutely. So, and I mean, you have to move the bales in, but as long as you get the bales while they're still dry, they are not too bad to move around. Once they get wet, the weight about triples on a bale of straw. So one of the things you need to do, decide where you might put them. Where will you have adequate sun? For tomatoes, you need probably more than a half day sun to be real successful with them. Less sun, they start getting more leggy. They don't flower as much. You lower production, but you can do it. But with more sun, you can get full production out of tomato plants. Accessing a straw bale, that can be an issue. Now, we're in an agricultural county, so if you know a farmer, if he doesn't have straw bales, he probably knows someone you can get some straw bales from. So they're around, and I've sourced them different ways. The first year, I did it the first time in 2014.
Wow.
What prompted you to start doing this?
Well, we were struggling with our garden with some of the rotational issues, and Charlotte and I went up to what's the December show in Indy? Is that the Flower and Patio or the Home and Garden show? One of those.
Home and Garden.
Home and Garden.
Yep.
January at the fairgrounds.
Yep.
It was a bitterly cold January day, and we were in there hiking around on a Monday morning. There weren't a lot of people there, which is why we went on Monday. And we walk by and I see this guy's doing a presentation on straw bale gardening. And the guy's name is Joel Karsten, Karsten, from Minnesota. Turns out he is sort of the father of straw bale gardening. There's some others that have toyed with very similar approaches to it, but he set up his own system. He was a farm boy in southern Minnesota and moved to a brand new subdivision with bad soil, and he figured out how to do this and perfected it over time. And he was doing a short 20-minute, half-hour presentation at lunchtime, and I said, well, let's sit down here and listen to this. So is by chance, and I was intrigued, and I talked to him afterwards. And that spring, I went on Craigslist and got 2 or 3 bales of barley straw from southern end of the county, just looking for some straw.
Yeah.
So it's gone very well. It's been very interesting. I mean, in this county, people would understand. One of the first questions I usually get is, so a bale of straw or hay, or what do you use? Well, we have ag people that understand the difference, but there's a lot of people not in farming. Straw versus hay. Hay tends to be a grass or legume crop that's cut and baled, and it's used for feed. One of the challenges of working with straw bale gardening, which you could still do it, is you have a lot of seed still included in that. It's not eliminated. Straw is the stems. Generally, it's the hollow stems of grain crops like wheat, oats, barley, rye, triticale, which is a cross of rye and wheat. And I've used about 3 different of those species through the years, just depending on the straw that I could get a hold of. And the advantage of it is you have these hollow straws. They help hold moisture. They also help hold air, oxygen for the roots. And you've got a stem crop that has been built from the farmer growing the crop, and it has nutrients in it, and the composting releases those nutrients back into the media in the compost, and that's what mostly supports the plants. You don't have to do much fertilizing after you get it going.
So when you're getting ready to set it up, does it matter which way the bale is turned?
Well, the reality is you can grow them any way you want, but there's recommended ways. And this Joel Karsten describes it, but most balers work similarly, and there's an advantage to have the stringer wire that holds the bale together on the sides, because it holds the bale together. So that leaves 2 sides to be up and down. If you look at a bale of straw, the way most balers work is one side has the cut ends of the straw on it. And you can see that because you see the little holes poking up. Mm-hmm. That is the ideal side to have up because it's just easier to water it, to get the fertilizer to work its way in.
And to have oxygen.
I've seen people do them the other ways, and it works fine too. It will still work. And the other thing, occasionally I've had a bale that just didn't look the same, and I don't know if someone has rebaled some old straw that fell, or there are different baler systems out there, but most of them work this way, where the cut end is up.
Okay.
So you're not busting the bale at all then?
I am not breaking the bale open at all.
I'm going to try. This got me going.
You have to see his system.
Yes.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a cool system once you use it, because once you go through the process, and again, it's called conditioning of the bales, and that is really where people have the most issues with making it work. To make this system work, you have to fully condition the bales, and that's to start the breakdown, the composting process. And it takes about 2 weeks, 12 days to 2 weeks to do that. So you can take bales and lay them out there and run through this process and plant in 2 weeks.
Wow.
So it works pretty well. Now, I've gotten to where I like getting them started a little bit ahead of that, and it just, if I give them 3 or 4 weeks, they start breaking down a little bit more, and they become just a little bit softer for getting the plants into them. So for me, that's worked a little better, but the system's designed to work with 2 weeks of conditioning.
So talk about how you yourself condition, because I have read that there are now some commercial products to enhance this composting, just as there are commercial products to enhance your home composting pile, which may have some elements that speed it up. But talk about how you do it, because
Okay.
it's cheap and easy.
Yeah, and I'll mention a couple of the other things. Just so Joel Karsten, he spent years having people struggle that they're either not in an ag area or they don't have good access, they feel like, to the fertilizers, the nitrogen, to do this process that he describes in his books, and it's well described in the books. So he started marketing this commercial product that he puts together and will ship to people. I think he calls it Bale Buster, and basically it's a simple way you can order the fertilizer to break down your bales for people that don't feel like they have good access to it. But in this area, we have access to a lot of fertilizers. And if you read his book, Straw Bale Gardening or Straw Bale Gardening Complete, it lays out the process of the 12 days of conditioning. And he describes the amount of nitrogen fertilizer based on using like a lawn fertilizer, which frequently have about 30% nitrogen. If you look at fertilizer components, they have three numbers, and it's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium are the three components, and it's percentage. So a 30-0-5 would be 30% nitrogen, 0 phosphorus, and 5% potassium. It's really about getting the nitrogen. That's what does the breakdown in the straw. Now, I looked for that. I actually went and bought urea, which farmers use, is like 46% nitrogen. It's a very high content, and you just have to use less of it. What I moved to and I've been doing this since 2014, so this is my 12th season, maybe. It's about that. 12-12-12 or 10-10-10 are very easy to come by, and they're general purpose fertilizers. You can buy it at Rural King or any farm store and lots of other
Absolutely.
ag places. And so that is a balanced fertilizer. 12-12-12 would be 12% nitrogen, 12% phosphorus, 12% potassium. And so the recommendations for conditioning are based on having over 20% nitrogen. So I just double the volume, the quantity. Where it says use a half a cup every other day per bale, I just use 1 cup, full cup. The extra phosphorus and potassium don't hurt anything, and they actually add a little bit to the fertility of the bale for the long haul. But it just is easy to come by. Now you end up with more material on the bale, so you'll see granular fertilizer laying on the top of the bales when it's done, but that's not a problem at all. That is fertilizer that with rain and your watering will work its way in and provide fertilizer. So with a 12-12-12 system, I'm putting on about 5 total cups per bale and doing it on 5 alternating days. And so you water it well, you saturate the bale, and you put on a cup. Then day 2, you just do water. About a gallon of water per bale.
So you want it saturated, like
You
want
want it
the
saturated.
saturated.
Because
Action won't happen without.
moisture and nitrogen is what the bacteria and fungi utilize to start this breakdown process.
Okay.
So day 3, you add a cup of fertilizer and water. Day 4, just water. 5, fertilizer and water. So alternating. So on about the 9th day, the way I'm doing it, on the 9th day I do the 5th cup of fertilizer, and then after that you're just doing about a gallon of water a day. And if the temperatures are warm, this will happen even if it's cold. You can start it early and it might move slightly slower. But
yeah.
the composting process generates heat. It's, if you've ever had a compost pile, it can get hot.
Yep.
And that's the same thing going on here. If it's warmer out, it happens even faster. And I've had it where halfway through on the 5th or 6th day, you can start to see some mushrooms poking up out of the bales, and that's a good thing. That shows the breakdown is occurring
The process
in
is
the
going.
bales. It's
And
going good.
they do no harm.
and
it's
they
fine,
do
okay.
no harm.
They're,
People
they're like
worry
an
about 'em.
indicator.
See,
Yeah.
I'm coming from the farming world, so this is like the saturating a bale and those kind of things are a little bit opposite. So.
Oh yeah, you
Yeah.
don't want that.
Okay, exactly. Yeah. So
That's-
I'm taking it all
it's
in.
because they start going bad for
Like,
what you would normally
exactly,
use them for,
yes.
but we're using them for something different.
Okay.
So, so then any time after about that 2-week period. Now, the one thing you can have to watch, they can really heat up. They can heat up. I mean, if anyone's harvested wet hay and got it in the barn, it's a danger. I mean,
Yes.
they can actually spontaneously
Combust.
combust.
Yeah.
So you're doing that, but you're doing it outside on the ground, and it's not a bunch of bales stacked together. So that's not a concern at all. But if you plant too soon, before that 2-week period, you can hit the maximum heat, and that will kill plants too. I mean, if the temperature in that bale is over 100 degrees, lots of plants will not
Yeah.
handle that. So that's partly you want to get 2 weeks out past that conditioning process. It starts cooling back down. The conditioning and the breakdown continues then, but it's not as hot.
And
then you're
that
fine.
breakdown continues all season
All season.
because that's what's feeding these plants and actually loosening up so that they have plenty of root growth.
Yes, those bales it depends on the year. Depends how wet the year is, how warm the year is, but that bale at the end of the season will be somewhere between a quarter to a half of its original size.
Okay.
They will actually sort of melt down, and the wires, whatever's around them, you'll see it start to be loosened. I mean, I even have gone in, they start to collapse and lean to the side with your hands. You can just sort of gently form them back together to hold them together to keep them on the roots. You don't want to do it excessively. You don't want to damage the roots, but you can help those bales stay together and stand up. I mean, you're a little bit, if one starts leaning on you.
And then after the end of the season, you and Charlotte fight about where that composted goodies are going to go.
Yeah, it is really nice because it's as clean a compost as you can have. It started with clean straw, and so it's half decomposed straw, which is great for mulching, for amending the soil around the yard. We've used them the next spring for potting because it's half composted straw, and it's just a good clean compost media to grow plants in. The other thing, and you're right, Charlotte and I fought early on. We've sort of worked a truce on utilizing and sharing the good stuff at the end. The one other thing I've done a couple of times, and I haven't done it the last couple of years, is you can reuse it to grow more, but you don't have the bale structure. So I built a frame that was about the dimensions of a bale, so maybe 2 by 3 or 4 foot. I used an old pallet. It doesn't have to be solid, but it had openings, and I stuffed it and packed it with the year before composted straw. So in essence, I formed another bale, and I planted potatoes in it.
Oh, okay.
And you can grow potatoes in a straw bale, but in that second year where it's a little bit softer, it really worked well. And you stuff a potato way down at the bottom of it, and it grows tubers out of the stem. So you want it to keep growing up. And then at the end of the year, you just knock the frame away from it, and it falls. The potatoes fall
You don't
out.
have to dig
You don't
them.
have to dig them.
Made life easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, what crops? You've mentioned tomatoes are probably your kingpin success, and I have enjoyed those tomatoes. What else have you attempted, and what worked pretty well, and what was maybe not worth the effort?
I've seen where people grow many garden crops in them successfully. I haven't tried near as many. It needs to be ideally an annual crop. People would immediately say, well, a straw bale, why don't you grow strawberries? Well, they'll grow great until the straw
Breaks down.
decomposes and breaks down. Strawberries are a multiple year crop, so it doesn't work quite as well. Now, people have used them and say, well, it melts down into a mound and they'll still grow in it. But it doesn't work quite as well because of the breakdown of the straw bale. Again, potatoes, root crops work very well in them. I think you need the straw a little further along in composting, ideally. It just makes it easier for them to grow. Tomatoes have been, that's our go-to. I'm a little
Spinach?
I'm a little too analytical, so I go and say, where's the most value if I'm going to have a bale of straw? I could grow sweet corn, but you can only get one or stretching it 2 stalks on one bale. That seems like a lot of work to get a couple of ears of corn.
So how many tomato plants can you put in a bale?
Somewhere between 1.5 and 2. So I've done it both ways. So 1.5 just means I grow 2 in the first bale and 1 in the second and 2 in the third, just to give them space. It can depend a little bit the kind of tomatoes you're growing. I mean, tomatoes, there are indeterminate and determinate varieties. Determinates are the commercial number one. It's where the plant gets to a certain size, produces a big crop, and it matures relatively in a narrow window, which for commercial production is what they want for harvest. Indeterminates just keep growing and keep producing tomatoes throughout the whole year. That's what we do because we eat them directly out of the garden. We're not doing canning. If you're doing canning, again, a determinate might work better for you too. But like a lot of the cherry tomatoes are indeterminate, and they will grow until they freeze. So they can vine and get very tall. So the size of the ultimate plant can determine how many you squeeze in. But I frequently, this year, I think I've got about 2 plants a bale. I think my cherries, I might have 3 plants spread over 2 bales with that, again, because they get so big. But so roughly that.
Are yours in the bale yet?
I planted them last Saturday, the 10th. And everybody has different feelings on tomatoes, and this is no different than anyone else's gardening experiences. But, you know, it's always that first warm day, the last week of April. Boy, it's so warm, I'm going to put out the tomatoes.
Nope.
I have been burned virtually every time I try that. And they may not freeze, but they get stunted by cold weather, some cold nights, and then a couple die, and then third week of May, I finally give up on some, and I put in some new ones, and the new ones outgrow the old ones.
So we have to think like Emily. She loves hot weather,
Yep.
and so when the hot weather's there, it's tomato time.
Okay, so once we get to the end of the 9 days of watering and fertilizing, then are we ready to plant, or do we have like a time that it sits before we plant?
I would say 12 to 14 days is when you want to plant, and in that time, you have to continue to give it water. You continue to give it a gallon of water a day. And
all summer.
And all summer for the most part. Now, you know, I figured out if it rains like yesterday, 3 or 4 tenths of rain is equal to a gallon on a bale. So if it rains, you don't have to water.
You get a day off.
And if you watered it and then it rains on it too, it's no big deal because the water drains out of the bale. You don't have a poor drainage situation
You
with
don't
the
have
bale.
a flooded field.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one nice thing about it is if you overwater a day, it doesn't hurt anything. The water, and that's one of the things, you know, if you're watering, if you're adding too much water if you see it steadily running out. And although it will get away and won't hurt it, you can, and I did this early on. I think someone had said, well, you can't overwater, so I thought, well, I'll just make sure and put extra on every day, and I won't ever have to worry about it. The one thing you can do if you do that every day is you can wash your nutrients out because the water does run out. And you can also keep the bale cooler, which, you know, you'd rather it warm up. So there is a prescribed amount. If you put, you know, a gallon or a gallon and a half a day on them, you are pretty safe. That pretty well works, other than rain can take care of that for you. The other thing I do to make it easier, and I mean, there's been summers where I watered it every day, and that's not too tough. It depends how many bales you have out there and how much you want to stand out there with a sprayer watering. I use a soaker hose. As a matter of fact, I'm going to hook up my soaker hose today now. The plants are in, and you just figure out how long it takes for the soaker hose to give you about a gallon of water. There's some ways to calculate that.
Sure.
And then I just turn on the hose for 20 minutes every morning, and that waters the bale. And the next step is, if I'm going to be gone for a week, you can buy a timer for $20 to $30
Easily, yeah.
at the store or online, and then you just set it up to water it every day. And I've done that, and that just makes it really simple.
So at that, see, you're talking, I can farm, but gardening is a whole new world, right?
Yeah.
So at that 12 to 14 days, what is the top of that bale going to look like? Do I look like I'm just planting into straw, or has it started to decompose that it's going to look differently?
It still looks like straw. I mean, it just looks a little more aged than it looks like a little bit older straw because you've tried to rapidly age it. The other thing, if you use 12-12-12, you're going to have granular fertilizer laying there.
Okay.
But so you can plant seedlings or plants into the bales. You can also use seed. And I haven't done very much of that, but it's because of the crops I'm growing. To use seed, you need a little bit of a seed bed for them to germinate. So if you take potting soil and spread a thin layer, a half an inch across the top of the bale, you can seed into that, keep that moist. They'll germinate, the roots will go down into the straw, and they'll grow into plants. If you're growing plants, you don't need that soil.
Just separate that straw and put it in there.
Tomatoes, I have done it multiple ways. I have taken the most common way I did it for many years is I took my big shovel, turned it over, and took the handle and jammed it straight down and wallow it around, and then I took a garden knife, or if the bales were too stiff, I've even used pliers, and you pull out a little bit of that straw, and you'll see it's wet and beginning to compost in there, and you make a hole big enough to push your tomato plant down into there, or whatever you're seeding into the bale.
How far are you putting that plant down in there?
Well, with a tomato, because roots will grow, it's a vine, your advantage is deep for more roots.
Okay.
Deep is better with a tomato plant. Right. I try and get it as deep as I reasonably can, and may only leave. I mean, I might have a plant that is, if it's a foot tall plant in a small pot, I may try and get at least half of it into the hole.
Okay, that's my question. Okay.
Pinch off some of those lower leaves, get it down into the hole. And I fill in around it. I've made a hole big enough I can ease it down in there without damaging it. And I take the wet, decomposing straw that I pulled out of the hole and stuff it back in around it, sort of to pack it back in.
It's like a little warm blanket.
Yeah.
I love this.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one thing you got to think about is the straw, the bale itself is a little bit like a container. And the outside couple of inches of that straw are not decomposing much because they have not been wet. They're staying drier. That is almost like your container. So you need to get your plant set down in more than a couple inches, even if it's not tomatoes. Think of that top 2 inches of straw as mulch.
Okay.
Yeah.
Plant it below that where you can see it's wet and starting to decompose. And then the mulch is built into the bale to protect it and hold moisture, and it moves forward.
Exactly. And the advantage is, because you've all heard me talk about my bucket attempts, and buckets are great starting out in the season. They're difficult to get enough moisture in toward the end of the season because you've had so much root and top growth. And the straw bale, with the consistent breakdown and the consistent water availability, seems to be much more supportive through the entire season. Another advantage.
Yeah, I've tried different things. I mean, because I've read people will add a little bit of additional fertilizer, and not very much. They might add a quarter of a cup of 12-12-12 once or twice a month just to add a little more fertility to it. And I've seen where people do foliar feeding, which you buy and mix a mixture and spray it on them.
Right.
And there may be some crops that it benefits more, but I have pretty well found that with my tomatoes, I don't see any advantage, and I've gone back to I don't add any fertilizer after the conditioning process.
Okay.
they
Just
do
water.
just fine. They're doing some water, and the breakdown is providing the nutrients for tomatoes. Now I've grown, well, we grow basil, and we use it a lot. Charlotte uses it a lot in cooking, and we use it
And you
almost.
do that in the bale as
And we
well.
do that in the bale as well. It's very compatible
Perfectly
with
paired
tomatoes.
with a fresh tomato.
Yeah, so we've grown
Yum.
between them, but I also now keep a bale out on the end so I can get more basil production out in the sun. Basil needs even more sun and heat than tomatoes. I mean, that's one thing
Right.
we learned. If you aren't planting
Herbs
tomatoes,
like the middle of Italy.
yeah, yeah, I always see the basil plants out for sale on May 1st in the store, and I'm thinking, yeah, it's much more an end of May crop.
Yep. Well, you get basil too soon, you will have one cool night, and it'll be black slime, and you get to start over.
It's not a frost issue with basil. Basil does not like a night below 50 degrees very well. It will really slow down and start shutting down.
Yeah.
We've grown a crop called Malabar spinach, which again is a Southern Asian vine crop, and it's sort of a spinach substitute. Again, it likes heat, and it's a vine crop we've used.
How do you support your tomatoes, especially because you grow indeterminates?
Yeah. For many years, I used a system that Joel described, and that's just like 7-foot steel fence posts that I drive in on either end, or if it's a long enough stretch, maybe one in the middle, and then some lighter weight wire that I just run a wire across between the posts about every foot to foot and a half, and then just tie up the plants to those. It's a simple trellis. And about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I decided to go to a simpler system, and I just went to Rural King, and also we have friends that farm, and I got some cattle panels, hog panels.
Yeah.
Just the simple, they're 4 foot by 6 or 8 foot. You can buy them different sizes, but you can buy them at Rural King, and just wire those to the fence posts, and it just makes a
Oh.
trellis.
And they're real
support.
strong.
They're very
Yeah.
strong. They're easy to work with. It takes a lot less time than even putting the wire
you
up.
reuse them.
Yeah.
I reuse them every year. I use them for trellises for flowers in the garden. Now that I've used them for that, they work real well for that too.
There you go.
So yes, I use that. And I mean, if you're growing a crop that gets tall enough, it needs to be tied up. You got to put something out there. You could put stakes. You can drive a stake into the bale if you're just doing a couple of tomato plants and want to stake them like in the garden too. So you could use anything that you would use in a garden for that. You can grow, if you were growing string beans or some other vining crop, that works good with it. I mean, the Malabar spinach is a vine crop, so again, it runs up like that.
Whatever you got.
Basil does not, it's a small
Shrub,
bush. It
yeah.
does not have to be tied up, so you don't always need that.
Have you tried cucumbers?
They would work great in it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I've done zucchini, so you just, again, you can let them vine upward. You can let them run off the bale onto the ground. It just depends on your setting of where you're growing them. But lots of people do different kinds of vine melons or cucumbers or those types of things. I mean, I can tell you my one biggest failure. It's always Charlotte loves this story. I thought, I've never grown sweet potatoes. I really knew nothing about it. And usually I'm better about researching something than this. And I thought, no, this is going to work. We'll just go sweet potatoes. So I went and you buy starts, and I got them in the bales, a couple of bales of half a dozen plants. They're doing great. I thought, well, just to increase the production, I'll add some fertilizer, and I added more fertilizer than I usually do, and they were the most beautiful sweet potato plants you've ever seen.
Too much nitrogen.
If you have ever grown sweet potatoes, someone that's grown them would have known immediately what I was doing. I was growing the most beautiful tops and nothing.
No potato.
You get the roots don't have to, you get just normal straight roots going down. They don't need to develop their roots because you provided them everything they need. And you start looking, sweet potatoes are typically grown in poor fertility soil. That's the nature of that crop. And I was doing the exact
You were
opposite.
just too good. You were making them way too healthy.
Yeah. So here is the big show at the end of the season where you cut the wires and break it apart and take all your potatoes out. And I hand Charlotte the phone and say, videotape this. And we have video of my failure.
An epic failure, you would call that.
Yes.
Humility.
But you got to live and learn.
Oh, yeah.
That's
how
what
this
gardening's all about.
Oh,
Is,
yeah. It was only 2 bales. It wasn't 10 acres.
It wasn't a
of
full
failed
crop.
sweet potatoes.
How many total bales do you do every year?
I'm at 7, but I mean, if you get on these, there's several Facebook pages on straw bale gardening, and there's people that do 50 bales.
Oh, wow.
I mean, they
It's
are
crazy.
they're
Yeah.
in full production. I mean, you see people do them for community gardens, and so there's lots of much bigger projects. I'm doing it enough to cover what our needs are. Now, I put a bale over at my daughter's house because the kids love cherry tomatoes, so I just got a bale in her yard with 2 cherry tomato plants for the grandkids. So,
For the grandkids or just for Sophie?
well, the younger ones are doing
They're
it too.
they're coming
Yeah.
into it too.
Yeah,
Okay.
there are tomato eaters in that family. Not all of them, but there is a good many.
Well, I
of
think
them.
even for somebody that has mobility issues, regardless of age, this is something that it's an easily accessible thing and
It is
easy to
easier.
manage. So
Yeah, you just need, again, it can be anywhere that you have adequate sun, and you do ideally need a source of water. Now, if you were just doing a bale or 2, obviously you can use a watering can, but it's real easy if you're within the distance of a hose to water it.
that.
That's the easiest way.
And my theory is things that need some sort of tending, the closer they are to where you come and go every day so that you're reminded
So you see them.
is a big plus.
Yeah.
Because out of sight, out of mind, I'm too tired. I went in the front door and not the back door. And then it's like, oh my God, when was the last time? So, yeah.
One of the huge pluses, we haven't talked about this, and this might be the biggest for a lot of people, is lack of weeds to deal with.
Oh my God.
Oh yeah.
It's a
Heaven
game breaker
on
versus a
earth.
regular garden.
Yeah.
Because the only thing that grows in there, I mean, if you have a bale of wheat straw, you'll get some wheat plants. There's some wheat seeds in there, and they'll send up shoots. You can pull them if you want. They don't develop in there. They don't amount to anything.
Anything.
There is virtually no weed control.
That is nice.
That is
Oh, yeah.
maybe
So nice.
the best if you
Yeah.
spent time
On July
weeding a garden.
20th, when it's 89 degrees, it's a
100%
really nice
humidity.
thing.
Yeah, you're not out there. Oh,
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
so fun.
I
This
mean,
has
you
been
can
the best.
you can have weeds on the ground around it, but we
Sure.
mulch around ours, so
Yeah.
it's just a
Now, do you put yours in a raised bed, or are you just on the
ours
ground?
are on the ground
Okay.
beside our house.
But
about,
you could do if you had a mobility issue. You could do a raised bed,
Oh,
or
I've
just
seen-
drainage.
Absolutely.
I've seen people build sort of a raised
Little
bench with
platform.
short sides that will just hold a straw bale. Do it even on a patio. Although I would warn you got to be prepared for water runoff
Right.
wherever you're putting it. You don't want to put somewhere it'll ruin something. But yes,
Right.
you can absolutely raise them if you want.
I love this.
Absolutely. Do we have any questions from listeners? Now's your time to call in. Otherwise, I would like, Jeff isn't just a neighbor who has great hobbies and studies things. Tell a little bit about your ag background. Many of you in the farming world will know Jeff from his days of long employ with Stewart Seeds, but give a little bit of your background. And Minnesota isn't really a stranger to you either.
No, I was an agronomy major at Purdue and went to grad school at University of Minnesota and got my graduate degree in plant breeding, and then went to work in the seed business. And I worked at a co-op company that I spent a short stint in the Mid-South and Southeastern U.S., and then came back to the Midwest and worked for a seed company in Illinois for about 6 years, Jake Seed Company, which has now been consolidated, as many of them have. But I was a soybean breeder, so I
Okay.
developed soybean varieties. In 1986, I got hired by Stewart Seeds, and that's what brought us, my family, to Greensburg.
Okay.
And so 3 very young kids, and so they're like raised as Greensburg natives, but we've been here since '86, and I worked for Stewart Seeds as a soybean breeder for almost 15 years. And then in about 2000, I shifted over and went to work for a company that licensed corn hybrids to seed companies.
Oh, okay.
And so I was in a little more of a technical sales kind of job where I was selling and licensing corn hybrids to companies that retail to farmers. So it was not a retail company. And so I spent about 16 more years doing that. So I spent a lot of time in that ag area. Actually, Charlotte's the more gardening expert because she did the gardening in all those years. I can tell you at the end of the day, I wasn't near as fired up to come home and work in the garden or field at that point.
Yes.
So retirement has taken me much more into this aspect of my hobbies.
Well, and I
fun.
think it is reflected because you have a scientific mind. So, with the exception of the blessed sweet potatoes, you do research and you are methodical, and has a mind like a steel trap. So he remembers experiences and builds on those, much like the ag world, the science world. There's some trial and error, but when you do things methodically, then you build on success. And that is quite evident by those of us who enjoy
Thank you.
the Lalo's success.
Yes. I'm excited. I'm going to try. I still have time to do tomato plants, right? Am I too late?
I don't know when we're getting
You
pretty
could.
late. Part of the problem is you got to get to the bales, and you got to get through
got
the
my 2
conditioning.
weeks in there, yeah.
And then you can do it. Now the conditioning should flow smoothly with it being warmer. But that's a little bit where we're at now. It won't.
Maybe
it could
next
be
year
done,
this is my project.
But also it could be the time to
I
work
think it'd
on
be
the
worth a
plan.
try,
Try
Emily.
it. We can try it.
And you
2
can get,
bales.
Yeah. 2
get a
bales.
small number and
2 bales. You would be conditioning from now to the 1st of June.
Yep.
Give it a few extra days. My
think I wanna-
theory is, this is non-scientific theory. I think you will have expedited conditioning
Okay.
because of the weather,
yeah.
and many old timers still would say, don't plant tomatoes till Memorial Day.
Okay.
So
I'm still,
you might be a
might be
week
okay.
or 9 days behind, but I don't think in gardening world that's terribly far behind. I've had to replant tomatoes
Oh,
at
yeah.
that point
Absolutely.
because I got too eager. So
If my conditioning, I'm medical side of the world, so
Yeah.
if my conditioning goes quicker, do I still need to wait those 14
Yes.
days? Okay.
Probably,
Yes.
because you got to watch that heat. I mean,
you don't want them
need-
too hot.
Hot.
Remember
You
that
need,
early
and you can
break
do
there.
that. You can stick your hand down into
And
the
just see
bale,
what
and you'll
is.
know if it's, what 100 degrees
Yeah.
is sort of
Yeah.
the comfort level.
Yeah.
If it's
It's an
hotter
early
than
fever.
that,
You'll know
Yeah.
that
Oh,
touch.
yeah.
you'll know. So I would say any time after 12 days, if it's not too hot.
Okay. I'm
you
going to
could
do
plant.
1 bale of tomatoes and 1 of cucumbers because I'm just curious.
I think that'll be great
It's gonna
fun.
be an
and we
experiment.
want to hear back.
Yes, I will
Yep.
take pictures.
Yep.
because that's the fun of it. I mean, I actually had a niece and her husband who had read about it, and he lives a desk job and couldn't wait, and they came down from Indianapolis and were real enthused. Well, then he put off the conditioning, so he didn't have a great year, but the experience was fabulous.
Yeah.
So I think it's
We're gonna
worth a
try.
try. I think so.
I do my succulent farming.
Yes.
And that's gone exceptionally well. This is a little
I'll
different,
bet.
but we can do it.
There you go.
We can do this.
I think that sounds great.
Thank you guys so much for being in this morning. What a great program.
Thank
so
you.
fun. All
was
right.
fun.
And we're going to see what happens. 2
All
bales,
right.
cucumbers and tomatoes. We
All
got
right.
this.
We want to hear a report.
All right. Tree Country 1330.